everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Capstone presentations. My name is Mark Zazai.
I'm Tiffany.
I'm Michael.
I'm Shirley. I'm Ashley. Erica.
And tonight we have an opportunity to present to you on our senior capstone in clean energy and innovation. So, climate change has arguably become one of the largest global threats to humanity. What does that mean for the energy sector? Well, first, consider these facts. There has been an unprecedented increase in energy demand due to higher temperature increases throughout the world. Second, we know that nations, both developing and developed, have generally striven towards being able to deliver and produce reliable energy. Third, we must always recall the general consensus on limiting global temperature general temperature increases to 2 degrees Celsius. So what do these facts tell us? They tell us that we need and demand innovative technology policies in order to further mitigate the impacts of climate change. So first, let's look at the greenhouse gas emissions by the U.S. We see that for quite some time, the greenhouse gas emissions for the energy sector has made up a significant portion of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Given the general strive towards net zero emissions and our goal of meeting the Paris Climate Agreement options, we see that this trend line represents not any major significant progress in attaining those goals. If you look at the graphic on the right, separating emissions by sector, we see that both the power and transport sectors make up the most significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions. And we can also see that the power sector has surpassed the transport sector has surpassed power sector for the 3rd consecutive year. Understanding these two things, we see that both sectors demand innovative and efficient policies. Now, considering electricity generation mix. Currently, we still use 60% of fossil fuels to generate our electricity. Granted, we do see some general growth in renewable energy. However, the demand to meet and validate our climate goals is not demonstrated by the increase in renewable energy. Understanding this, now it is important that we further leverage these policies in a variety of ways. And throughout the semester, using these facts as a backdrop, our capstone has had the opportunity to look at various programs and mechanisms, such as China's clean energy policies, looking at potential Green New Deal programs, and also leveraging green energy patent. For tonight's presentation, we'll be looking at discussing technology push policies, followed by public-private partnerships, and then we'll look at grid resilience and a cap and trade program which can possibly be incorporated into a national renewable portfolio standard. Then we'll look at the promotion of electric vehicles and understanding the political constraints that are involved in such technologies. The purpose of the policies we discussed tonight are to further elaborate on the trajectories involved in future litigation and legislation in implementing these new technologies for climate change mitigation. And finally, we'll close with closing remarks and discussions of our presentation.
So the development of clean energy technology is extremely important now due to the current trajectory of climate change. Clean energy tech, they can reduce the amount of emissions, but funding for programs that help push these technologies forward to the market is extremely important and they need support. When we talk about technology push, we mean that government actions push clean energy tech programs and policies forward. So an example of a successful program we could look at is the Advanced Research Project Agency Energy, or ARPA-E. So ARPA-E helps develop, fund, and push technologies to the market, and they also help technologies move past the valley of death, or the beginning stages where the private sector doesn't really get involved with funding because there's not a lot of proof if the technology will be successful in the future or not. So due to private sectors being reluctant in the beginning, this is where government investments have to come in. So the government support should concentrate on innovation and research and development, concentrating on basic research for us to better understand concepts, and applied research for us to create and discover new things. But that can lead to government choosing low risk or easy to build projects, and those projects can be the least innovative, so sometimes we need to take risks, and the Loan Programs Office can help with that. So the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office, or the LPO, they fund large-scale energy infrastructure projects, and they give out loan guarantees. So the federal government, they cover the borrower's debt obligation in case the borrower defaults. So the federal government, they are sharing some of the financial risks that come with technologies that haven't made it to the market yet. Government investment should also be thought of as a long-term policy. Better results arise if there are no lags, if there's stable support. So So besides public funding, private funding is extremely important as well. They can further develop and push technologies to the market. They can help fund the higher costs that are involved in the later stages, and they also work with governments to create more policies. So while the public sector is important in the beginning stages, when it comes to deploying technology that's cost competitive, that's where the private sector comes in. So our policy recommendations are as follows. There should be more significant funding from ARPA-E and the Loan Programs Office. The annual direct federal expenditures on research and development should be doubled. So to date, $1.5 billion have gone to more than 35 programs and 500 projects. So if we can increase spending, we can increase the amount of projects that get support. ARPA-E should also give longer support to technologies. Typically, financial assistance lasts for 1 to 3 years, but if technologies need more time than that, then they should receive that support. Additionally, when choosing which projects to fund, more projects should be higher risk. Doubling the amount of funding can allow ARPA-E and LPO to choose higher risk projects. So an example is the Ivanpah Power Plant. It received a $1.6 billion loan guarantee from the LPO, and it was because it was it was going to be the largest solar power plant that was going to be created, and it was also dealing with a new type of concentrated solar technology. So overall, funding for riskier projects can boost the private engagement, and private actors are then more willing to invest in the high-risk deployment and can also accelerate market formation.
Okay, so one area that we feel like should be prioritized in federal R&D programs is grid resilience technology. Grid resilience can help us adapt to the impacts from climate change as well as reduce disruptions. And disruptions can be measured in the amount of electrical outages that have occurred over the past few years as a result of severe weather. And as this chart shows, most of the severe weather power outages have been due to severe weather, over 60%, as well as Hurricane Sandy and other hurricanes as well. We also believe that grid resilience technologies can also facilitate a cleaner electric grid. Examples of these technologies are microgrids and transmission lines. Microgrids are local energy grids that can disconnect from traditional electrical grids and incorporate the use of other forms of energy, such as solar. Transmission lines are what allow electricity that's produced to be moved to where it's consumed. This technology, if it's improved, can really further the development and deployment of renewable energy. So we believe that R&D support is needed to identify technological solutions as well as further the deployment of grid resilient technology. Over the past 9 years, the federal government has invested around $8 billion in these areas to upgrade an electrical grid. As well as DOE recently in 2018 invested around $60 million in R&D efforts. So our policy recommendation is, according to the federal government, the cost to upgrade the U.S. electrical grid is between $332 billion to $476 billion. We recommend that the U.S. government invest $100 billion over a 10-year period. Reason being is that the amount of time is a reasonable period to attain the funding necessary to for these investments, as well as the amount of net benefits that resulted from the upgrade of the electrical grid, equated to about $1 to $2 trillion in net benefits.
So on the other end of the tech push policies previously discussed is a demand pull policy. and that creates or expands markets to increase payoff to successful innovation. And what we're proposing is a federal cap and trade program. And just to give an overview of what cap and trade is, it places a limit or a cap on the total greenhouse gas emissions allowed, and this tends to be decreased over time so that emissions also decrease. And companies and nations that participate are given annual allowances for their emissions, which may be traded or basically sold to other companies or nations that need more and they have an excess. So this type of program encourages companies and nations to reduce their emissions by one, avoiding fines, and two, from profiting by selling their excess allowances. So why cap and trade? We thought some people might be resistant to the idea of phasing out fossil fuels in a short amount of time, and we thought this would be a good adaptive strategy to work with what we have in the current political climate and phase it out step by step so it's not too radical of a change at once. And why a federal policy? The issue with state programs is that there is the problem of resource shuffling, also known as carbon leakage, and this occurs when states or companies participating in the program basically participate in interregional trading of energy so that they can avoid the emissions caps. An example of this happened in the California Cap and Trade Program when Pacific Northwestern states were exporting their hydropower, a cleaner source of energy, to California while increasing their own use of fossil fuels because they could if California was reducing their overall emissions of that region. And the problem with this is that even though the emissions in California decreased, overall emissions of that region they offset the emissions from that region. So basically nothing changed in terms of the emissions. And this is the policy that we are proposing. It's a federal cap and trade program jointly overseen by the DOE and the EPA. And what would happen is that the goal is to have 40% below 1990 emissions levels by the year 2030. And when the program starts, it will be a 3% decrease from the previous year's emissions. So for example, if the program started in 2020, it would have to be 3% below the 2019 levels. And then that would be used as the baseline for the upcoming years. And then this type of program would help reduce resource shuffling because as a program that includes all of the 50 states, they wouldn't be able to basically shift their sources of power to other states as we saw in the California program. And the sectors covered would be electricity generators, large industrial facilities, and the transportation sector, including aviation. And these are sectors that emit 25,000 metric tons of carbon or more annually, and this is equivalent to the emissions from the annual energy use of about 2,300 homes in the U.S., or the annual emissions of 5,300 cars. So in summary, this would cover mainly the energy sector, major manufacturers, oil refineries, and a significant portion of the transportation sector. And states would be granted a unique number of allowances based on historic capabilities, so we know that not all states are able to do the same things because they may have different resources and different sources of energy, so we would account for that. And they would be responsible for reporting their emissions to the DOE or the EPA annually. And then there would be fines for exceeding the cap. This would likely be set by the market because that would depend on the allowance price. So the allowance price, we can't really tell you what exactly it would be, but based on the EU's program, the emissions trading scheme, and California's program, it'd be between $25 and $30, and that is based on this chart. So this is the EU ETS, and that's a pretty recent graph, and their current price is around $30. And the California program is currently at $15, but hopefully we would be able to increase that amount with a national program. And these are based on the same goal that we are proposing 40% below 1990 levels by the year 2030.
We would like to complement a cap and trade scheme with a national renewable portfolio standard. A renewable portfolio standard, or an RPS, is a set of regulations that requires an increase in the proportion of total energy produced by non-fossil fuel sources. To give a little background, RPS has a long history in the United States. Currently 29 out of the 50 states and Washington, D.C. have adopted their own version of an RPS and have helped to grow the $64 billion renewable energy market. It's not unfamiliar at the national level either. It's believed that a national scale RPS can grow the market far beyond the capacity of state-scale legislation. The first national RPS was proposed in 1997, with the frequency of proposals ramping up in the early 2000s. So the newly proposed target should be ambitious enough to produce the desired environmental and economic results, but conservative enough to appeal to politicians that may not be primarily concerned with climate change. So with this in mind, we're proposing 40% renewable energy by 2030, where nuclear and hydropower energy won't be eligible towards contributing to growth beyond the current 17.1% renewable energy in the United States.
So this isn't the first time that a national renewable portfolio standard has been implemented. One of them is currently underway, although in its infancy, in China. The way it is working in China is China has allotted various allowances to the provinces based on their emission schemes. For our national renewable portfolio standard, we found, based on research, that there are various benefits. The first being comprehensive participation. Also, currently, more than half are involved in the RPS scheme. However, being able to leverage all states to have a renewable portfolio or some kind of mandated standard will not only leverage competitiveness, but will also guarantee that the federal target is reached. The next benefit that we believe would be achieved with this is balanced responsibility. One study by the International Renewable Energy Agency found that a few states that were amongst the highest CO2 emitters did not have any kind of mandate set in place. The third benefit that we found to this was that there would be lower usage of renewable energy credits. So renewable energy credits were found to be used by almost every single, most states in 2018 to meet their renewable portfolio standard scheme. However, even though there are these benefits, there are a few challenges that we found in our research. The first one is the issue of clarity. For example, some states have noted that there are some issues in terms of clarity of what counts as renewable as opposed to low carbon. That could be resolved with a national renewable portfolio standard. Sorry to word. And then we also see that one of the other challenges is also guaranteeing that the renewable energy credits are not used to meet the federal and state level RPS, but then also not surpassing the federal level RPS. So for example, we've seen that almost every state has significantly increased their RPS over the years. And if we set this target at 40%, we want to ensure that each state can still surpass their own RPS while meeting the federal RPS without using too many RCs, which some research suggests, some studies have suggested that the usage of RCs inhibits the growth of competitiveness and the market for renewable energy.
So in combination with our cap and trade program and our renewable portfolio standards, we're also recommending several steps for zero emission vehicles, which I'll refer to as ZEVs or other things in this presentation. So as we transition the nation over to clean energy, as Mark mentioned earlier, power and transit are our two biggest greenhouse gas emitters. So we also think that it's important to transition the U.S. over to zero emission vehicles running on electricity produced from renewable energy sources. So our policy program is based off of California's successful ZEV program. The way it works is auto manufacturers have to produce and sell a certain number of zero-emission vehicles each year, which give the vehicles themselves give a certain number of credits based on the amount of the distance that the car itself can drive. And credits can be sold and traded between companies. If companies like, for example, Tesla often goes over their credit amount, they can sell these to other car manufacturing companies that might be underperforming during the year. This program basically ensures that these auto manufacturers that currently dominate the market with fossil fuel powered vehicles will have to promote and sell electric vehicles alongside and help us make the transition to all electric vehicles on the road and no fossil fuel vehicles. Manufacturers that don't hit the credit amount will be fined a certain amount based on how many they didn't sell. And the money from these fines, we suggest go toward electric vehicle charging stations across the nation, because one of the big flaws or obstacles with zero emission vehicles is the lack of accessibility. So by building more charging stations, we make owning an electric vehicle more convenient and accessible for the average person. Another common misconception with zero emission vehicles is that fossil fuel vehicles are cheaper, which is actually not the case, as shown here. And we are proposing a federal tax break system for electric vehicles in order to make electric vehicles more affordable and accessible for the average consumer. There's currently already a federal program for this with between $2,500 and $7,500 given depending on the model of the car and the battery. But this program phases out after 200,000 cars are sold. But because of the success that we think this tax break program has brought in helping us get more electric vehicles on the road, we suggest the program be continued for the next 5 to 10 years to help us meet the goal of getting fossil fuel powered vehicles off the road and making the U.S. greener and more efficient by reducing our total overall emissions.
So in attempting to introduce new clean energy policy, there are several political constraints that can be encountered. One is related to the views held by politicians. So on one hand, we have President Trump and other politicians denying climate change altogether. But contrastingly, we have mainly AOC really spearheading policy proposals like the Green New Deal and taking an active stance on the desperate need to combat climate change. That being said, the Senate failed to pass the vote on the Green New Deal resolution, with all of the Republican senators voting against it, as well as 4 Democratic senators and the remaining just voting present. Another challenge to support of a policy like the Green New Deal is its portrayal in the media and its perception by the public. Here we see a contrast in the way people describe the Green New Deal. We see Fox viewers using language like ridiculous, stupid, costly, and cow, which is referring to the perceived possibility of government-mandated veganism. And we see non-Fox viewers using language like emissions, carbon reductions, and address climate change, which more closely align with the aims of the Green New Deal policy. Lastly, it's likely that the Green New Deal or the policy that we propose today will be associated with a high price tag, but we believe that this will be compensated for by the high economic and social impacts of climate change, as well as the potential benefits of this type of policy. As Michael alluded to earlier, here we see the increase in natural disasters over time, which is just one of the consequences of human-driven climate change. And this consequence, as well as others like the negative health impacts that are incurred, help to show that the cost of inaction may be equal to or even higher than resolution policy. Oh, and other potential benefits may include the generation of many jobs. It'll diversify and secure the United States energy sector and make them a more competitive player in the global energy sector.
So in closing, we think the U.S.'s transition to clean energy is more necessary now than ever. Funding for government R&D and investing in resilient grid efforts are needed to help us have a secure future. We strongly recommend a federal cap and trade program, renewable energy portfolio standard, and zero emission vehicle program to help these policies will help the U.S. pave the way and reduce our harmful effects on the environment. We understand that our suggestions come at a time of stagnancy in our federal government. However, we urge our political leaders to understand that the time to address climate change is now, and our policy ideas are plausible, effective steps to help the United States make the full transition to clean, renewable energy.
Any questions?
So for the reduction up to 40% of renewables by 2030, why remove hydro and nuclear from those if you're focused on greenhouse gas emissions?
So, I mean, there are a few of the environmental impacts from hydro that we have come across in our research, such as displacement of both like marine life and other like populations that are around there. So we consider that to be one of the ones that, and at least in conveying the positive perception of a national renewable portfolio standard, we want to focus on energy sources that have been most leveraged and seen the most significant progress in that sense. So that was one sense for hydro. For nuclear, we just understood that the cost and stagnancy of nuclear production in it, so furthering that would have been a little too complicated in the overall policy recommendation.
One
wanted to ask, a cap and trade program would include a carbon tax, and if I'm right about that, why would your group support a cap and trade system over a carbon tax?
So what we know about the carbon tax is that it's basically like, they go hand in hand with the cap and trade program. I'm not saying it's not possible to do a carbon tax like in addition to a cap and trade program, but just from our research, we thought a cap and trade program would be more effective because the EU as like, what is it, how many, 28 state or countries are doing that, and we have something like that in California, so it would just be political feasibility about trying to do something we already have instead of proposing a carbon tax, which we don't really have right now.
How did you come up with the targets of 40% renewable by 2030 and 40% below 1990 emissions by 2030? And are they aggressive enough to actually avoid what we need to avoid in terms of the climate disaster?
Okay, so I think one of the reasons we wanted to stick with the number below 50% just for pure reasons of political feasibility. And ideally, obviously, like we would choose 100%, that would be amazing, but we do need, like we would want these policies to get passed, and we do believe that the two types of policy, the cap and trade and the renewable portfolio standard, can complement each other in a way where progress can be made faster even if the goals aren't as ambitious.
I've heard statistics that suggest that it's actually more energetically sustainable to keep cars on the road rather than trading them in for electric vehicles due to the energetic cost of producing new vehicles. Do you take that into consideration of your timeline projections of transitioning over to electric vehicles?
Yeah, so even using a zero emission vehicle, it doesn't actually have zero effect on the environment because of the production and the materials involved. But the research that we found suggested that even with those costs and producing the electricity and the batteries and all of that, it still would be more environmentally friendly to use electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles versus traditional fossil fuel vehicles.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.